We're gonna wait. We're gonna wait just a moment for people to arrive. Sometimes people are coming from one meeting to the next, and so want to make sure that um, people get here so they can hear about Dr. Lewis and the introduction. So how we're going to organize this, I'll just say briefly, and then we'll put it in the chat, is Dr. Lewis is going to speak for around 50 minutes, and then we're going to have questions at the end. I can read the questions out loud if that's preferable, and so put them in the chat box if you, or at the end you can raise your hand and when we see you, Dr. Lewis can call upon you. So, let's see. I'm going to give it one more minute.
Okay.
Right. So I am very pleased to introduce everybody to Dr. John Lewis, who's the founder and president of Dr. Lewis Nutrition. He's a voluntary associate professor in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. And before I forget, we are the Osher Center for Integrative Health. And so this is our speaker series. And this is the Wolfson Speaker Series. And that Dr. Lewis is going to speak. Oh, to continue. So Dr. Lewis is a diplomat and faculty member and advisor of the Medical Wellness Association. He has been the principal investigator of over 30 different studies. And during that time, he has been instrumental in raising over $23 million in grants, gifts, and contracts for research studies and clinical trials and educational programs for medical students. Much of his research has focused on evaluating the effects of nutrition, dietary supplementation, and exercise on various aspects of human health and disease. He has been an invited speaker at multiple international and national conferences. He has over 180 peer-reviewed publications in some of the world's leading scientific journals. His seminal publication in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease from his Alzheimer's disease study allowed him to leave academics, not completely, he's still part of us, and but also to pursue a science-based business career. And also has enabled him to select for a widely acclaimed, he was selected for a widely acclaimed TED Talk, TEDx Miami. And you can look that up, or if you want, we can put it in the chat, about how dietary supplementation can improve brain health. Dr. Lewis also embodies the model of health and wellness by eating a whole food, plant-based diet for over 27 years and takes certain key dietary supplements and has a thorough and rigorous daily exercise training program. And so without further ado, I am very pleased to turn it over to Dr. John Lewis.
Thank you, Dr. Redwine, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here to chat with everyone today and discuss the research my colleagues and I have been conducting for almost the last 20 years. That's very hard to believe. But we are going to talk about sugars today. I know sugar typically gets a very bad rap, but I'm here to tell you that not all sugars are created equally, and we'll focus a lot on immune system functioning in this lecture and talk about why certain sugars are very good for you. So let's move right ahead. I know we don't have, I could actually give this lecture, as I was telling Dr. Redwine, I could actually give this lecture for about 2 hours just because of the amount of information. But with about 45 to 50 minutes today, I'll probably be just a little bit rushed, but I want to make sure that I cover at least the high points. And then if you guys would like to have me back to do like a part two, then I would be more than happy to do that. If anybody would like to have a copy of this lecture, here is my email address and then my business email address. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about this work. It's my phone number as well. If anybody would like to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to discuss all of this work that I'm very proud of. I want to initially acknowledge two people who changed my life about polysaccharides, the complex sugars that will be discussing today, because without those two folks, this never would have happened. I wouldn't even be sitting here talking to you about this today. Dr. Reg McDaniel, a pathologist by training, who is just an incredible human who has the heart of gold, still going to his office every day at the age of, I believe Reg turned 89 this year. And he shared with me his experiences about 40 years ago now, where he was introduced to the aloe polysaccharides, the polysaccharides from aloe vera, by 10 men who had HIV at that time. They had no viral load and their CD4 cells were normal. Total medical heresy. And they were coming to Reg to help explain, as a pathologist from his perspective, why an aloe polysaccharide could actually, at that time, there was no such thing as antiretroviral medication. So why in the world could they take this aloe polysaccharide and again have no viral load of the virus and have normal CD4 cells? And so that led him basically from running a pathology unit to practicing nutrition. It completely changed his life. And then we meet 20 years later, around 20 years ago. He's telling me about sugars from aloe vera. He's blowing me away with all of these stories. And I'm like, I have no idea what this man's talking about, but I'm very fascinated and happy to learn. And so it just went from there. And I consider this man, again, to have not only a heart of gold, but just what he's accomplished in his career is truly remarkable with helping people with these sugars from aloe vera. And then Miss Barbara Kimley, a patient who was a patient at Sylvester. And Barbara unfortunately had metastatic disease, went through the whole 9 yards of conventional treatment, was still told she only had 6 months to live. She found an advertisement for a rice bran product that I will be talking about again in this lecture. And Barbara ended up living another 9 years. Now, you can imagine, given that type of prognosis, you're told you can only live for 6 more months if you're lucky, and then living another 9 years. And so back when I met Barbara again about roughly 20 years ago, when Sylvester used to put out the publication, I think it was quarterly, and they would highlight a patient, a donor, a physician, a nurse, an administrator. It was a feel-good publication that, of course, the internet has destroyed. But Barbara sent me the issue of that publication about her life and her journey, telling me about this rice bran product. Again, I had no clue about it, how it had saved her life. I got to meet Dr. Aaron Wolfson, who's still at UM. And Aaron told me, like, Barbara would come to his office for a follow-up. He would look at her chart and he would say, Barbara, I don't even know how you're alive. I don't even know why in the world you're sitting here, because when I look at your labs, you should not even be here. And so Barbara got another 9 years of life that she completely attributed to this rice bran product that again changed my life in terms of working with this material and the research and what my colleagues and I have done for the last 20 years. And of course, thanking sponsors and people who participate in clinical trials. Without both of those, we have no research. So for me, that's always very important to acknowledge those folks. I also think it's very important to acknowledge what we are fundamentally and what Hippocrates said so eloquently way before our calendar even started, and that was, let food be thy medicine. If you think about that from a fundamental perspective of what we are as humans, as mammals, and what we need for our cells to function properly, it's incredible to me that this man was able to come up with that with no technology, no ability to see inside the human body, just to be able to basically help people related to their symptoms or how they were feeling, what he was, assessing through that mechanism. And so he came up with this, and to me, it's just so fundamental. And I think a big part of where we are today with all of these chronic disease epidemics, we've gotten so far away from that. I know a lot of people are trying to bring it back. I'm trying to do what I can do as one man on, his own little journey, but it's just so incredibly important to always remember this, that food and diet and dietary factors and our nutrients and our phytonutrients, besides oxygen being obviously our first nutrient, every single thing we stick into our mouth is so important to how we function and how we live. The again, this is going to be a presentation on this ongoing, I say ongoing, even though we still don't have any active clinical trials today because we don't have funding, but we are still looking at the data. We just published a couple of papers in the last couple of years from both our Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis trials. So I say ongoing because we have just a gigantic amount of information in our databases that haven't even been, I don't know, probably even 20% of that information has even been looked at. But now, as you know, running a small business, it's difficult to carve out a lot of time for scientific publications. So I do acknowledge that this work is still ongoing, at least from that perspective. So I've mentioned polysaccharides. Again, I'm going to be focusing on rice bran and aloe vera. Very commonly, when I talk about aloe vera, what's the first thing what's 99% of people will think of or say when we talk about aloe vera, and that's what? It's a topical solution for a sunburn or some other cut or wound. Absolutely, no question about it. But have you ever considered, well, why is it that that aloe vera gel is so effective? And the other thing that people will say as I start talking about the use of the polysaccharides in our research is, oh, well, he's talking about aloe vera. I'll just drink the juice and I'll get the same effect. Unfortunately, you will not. Number one, it's 99% water. So you'd have to drink bucket loads of that gel to get any kind of therapeutic or physiological effect once it's been dehydrated and then concentrated into a powder. And number two, it tastes nasty as hell. It would make you sick if you've never tried pure aloe vera gel. We have some growing in our backyard here. I assure you, you would not get enough of it in any kind of an amount through the gel to have the effect of what we're going to show in our research here today. And then the rice bran, Dioscorea, I have there on the slide as well. That's a Mexican wild yam. That's also another very rich source of these polysaccharides. And by the way, I don't claim to know everything about every plant out there. There are so many nutrients, so many phytonutrients that can have benefits. So I don't claim to be an expert in all of these different polysaccharides. My colleagues and I have really focused on the two from aloe vera and rice bran. So sugar, this word sugar, I like to sort of position myself as the myth-busting man of sugar simply due to the fact that I want to literally pull my hair out every time I hear somebody say, all sugar is bad for you. That is a terrible statement to make simply because what I said just a moment ago, not all sugars are created equally. And I know that probably for the most part, people are referring to the first two, monosaccharides and disaccharides. But still, it is a very ignorant statement to make when you say all sugar is bad for you, because again, not all sugars are created equally. So let's talk about the different types of sugars for just one moment. First of all, you have monosaccharides, mono one, saccharide, one molecule of sugar, like high fructose corn syrup. I think we can probably all agree that if we're eating lots of high fructose corn syrup every day, that's probably not your best strategy for achieving good metabolic health. So you're setting yourself up with problems down the road. Number two, disaccharides, Di2 molecules of sugar, saccharides. The most common one there, of course, is sucrose, white table sugar. Again, if you're eating loads of sucrose every day, it's probably not your best metabolic health promoting strategy. Number three, oligosaccharides. These are sugars found, excuse me, most prominently in breast milk. So obviously, when we're born, when we're drinking our mother's milk, these oligosaccharides are very, very important for our growth and development. There are usually 8 or 10 molecules of glucose attached together by these very sophisticated bonds. And then finally, you have polysaccharides, many saccharides, many molecules of sugars. These things are literally hundreds and in some cases thousands of glucose units attached together by these very sophisticated glycosidic bonds. They are like 5D structures. You cannot even draw these things on a piece of paper. They are more dense in coded information. Everything that we put into our system, as you know, is like a library, and our genes interpret that library of information, and then they instruct our cells on how to function properly. These polysaccharides are more complex than anything else that we stick into our mouths, be it amino acids, fatty acids, certainly vitamins, minerals, elements, any of these other cofactors or metabolites. So that is the reason why we believe this is a working theory, especially Dr. McDaniel and I, we believe the reason why people respond to these polysaccharides so rapidly and so effectively is due to all of this coded information that, again, our genes interpret, and they do that for everything we put in our mouths. But everything that is encoded in these particular polysaccharides is so beneficial to how our cells function. So let's remember two things. And me as a scientist, as an author, as somebody very careful about how I use the language, when we talk about sugars, let's please remember that number one, it depends on their biochemical structure. And number two, it depends on their source. Again, there are lots of other types of seaweed, mushrooms, vegetables, grains that contain different types of polysaccharides. But in my opinion, when you look at the literature and you compare, even just in our little corner of the world at the University of Miami, forget all the other research that's happening around the world. When you compare everything that we know of in terms of what you can benefit from in Mother Nature, I would put aloe vera and rice bran up against anything else out there. The only thing, in my opinion, that comes close is probably curcumin, the extract that you get from the turmeric root. So anyway, that's something very important for me that I am continually trying to address just in, people's use of the language and particularly how sugar is perceived, because it's definitely not a one size fits all. So we looked at this particular formula that when Dr. McDaniel and I were first becoming friends, and he was really taking me under his wing and teaching me all about everything that he had done up to that point, and it was just mind-boggling. I mean, literally blowing me away. He was giving a lecture one day at a conference, and there happened to be a lady in the audience who was listening to him talk about his anecdotal experiences with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And it just so happened that this lady had four family members. She and her husband had lost four family members to Alzheimer's disease. So Reg is talking about using the polysaccharides from aloe vera with these different patients. She was very excited, very encouraged about what he was doing. She and her husband they developed a relationship, a friendship with Reg. And then they decided, well, hey, we've got some extra money. They were fairly wealthy in the oil and gas business out in Texas, and they wanted to make a donation to research. So I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Reg was not affiliated with any university or any research organization. So he called me up one day and he said, John, we have an opportunity to do a clinical trial in Alzheimer's. A clinical trial in the polysaccharides. We just need to do it in Alzheimer's because of the family's request based on their own history. So even that is another step in my evolution of just being, again, in the right place at the right time. Otherwise, these two studies would never have been conducted. And then we were able to sort of piggyback onto that, the multiple sclerosis study. So within aloe vera, and I'm sure many of you have probably heard of the moringa tree as being referred to as the tree of life. I refer to the aloe vera plant as the plant of life, and it's due to this particular nutrient, this acetylated polymannose, ace-mannan, aloe polysaccharide. They all are synonyms for the same thing. Again, it's this very sophisticated polysaccharide that occurs in aloe vera. Now, aloe vera is not just polysaccharide in water. It contains amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, minerals. I mean, it truly is the plant of life. But this particular polysaccharide, I am not aware of it occurring in any other type of plant. And to me, that's what makes it so special. So this was a really nice review paper. I'm happy to share any papers from my lecture today, not just this presentation, if any of you are interested in getting any of these papers for your library. But if you look at all of these incredible effects that aloe vera has, again, and they didn't quote any of our research, and I wasn't personally offended by that, but nonetheless, if you look at all these impressive effects, this is the reason why human beings have been using aloe vera for millennia. And of course, we know the wound and tissue healing effects predominantly. But if you look at some of these other things, I mean, nitric oxide production, who would have even thought that aloe polysaccharide can stimulate such a thing? So again, there are a whole host of effects that these aloe polysaccharides can conduct within our own metabolism. Now and to show you the study of sugars is not anything recent. This paper is from 1985. This was a husband and wife who published this paper, and they were talking about polysaccharides in their work in biochemistry. And so this is a graphic representation of basically every cell in our body. And of course, the mitochondria gets all the publicity because it's the powerhouse, it's the energy producer, blah, blah, blah. And it's always notarized, it's always given all this credit for cellular functioning. But when you look at what happens between the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi, according to Kornfeld and Kornfeld, you need these 9 molecules of this particular ACE mannan, this mannose sugar, in that equation where it's linking together where the endoplasmic reticulum is linking together all of these nutrients. And that happens, of course, when a cell replicates itself, when a cell is talking to another cell, when a cell says, hey, wait a minute, there's a bacteria or there's a virus here, we got to do something about it. All of these different things, when it creates a bioactive compound like a cytokine or a growth factor, all of these things are happening, and it needs those polysaccharides every time the cell does that. So again, that's why it's such an important nutrient. And sort of generally speaking, like at a higher level view, basically we look at these polysaccharides as being signaling mechanisms for the immune system. And then when you take that a step further, when you think of the best analogy I like to use for the immune system, yes, of course, it's our first line of defense against invasion and infection, but what else does it do? It is the conductor of the symphony orchestra. So when you have the conductor waving his wand out there, keeping the different parts of the music in play and in harmony and in balance, that's exactly what our immune system is doing. So it's talking to the cardiovascular system. It's talking to the central nervous system. It's talking to all of our other major organ systems to keep them in balance and in harmony, exactly like a symphony conductor does. So that's why I think, again, when you look at how these polysaccharides work, and I'm going to show this to you in just a few minutes, this is the reason why these things are so effective, because it's signaling to the immune system to do something. Where I really was just completely blown away with Dr. McDaniel's story, and it's very similar to Barbara's story, actually, from her rice bran perspective, but from the aloe vera perspective, as Dr. Reg was getting sort of down the road in his journey with this, he was able to work with a hospice center in the Dallas area for cancer patients. And so we all know hospice, unfortunately, is typically your step prior to the funeral home. You're basically giving up for any hope in terms of recovering from your disease or illness. And so Dr. Reg was able to talk to the medical director, went in there and talked to people, again, you're terminal, you basically are giving up for any hope, and say, would you be interested in trying these polysaccharides to see what would happen? And so you can see here from this first slide, this was a gentleman that had metastatic disease from the liver in July of 1999, again, very similar to Barbara's story, after having surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation, the whole 9 yards, was still sent to hospice. Look at the size of that tumor in July 2000. You can see a very significant reduction in the tumor size after consuming these polysaccharides. As of 2024, and I forgot, I've just got too many things going on. I should have actually asked Reg last week before this lecture if he had spoken to this gentleman again this year, but as of 2024, this man was still alive. He left hospice cancer-free. And I want to be very clear. Please, no one leave this lecture and say, Lewis said you use nutrition to treat disease. I am not saying that at all. That is the pharmacological model or paradigm. The nutritional model says you provide the raw materials that the cells need to function properly as guided by our genes, and then the body's own inherent intelligence will allow itself to repair, restore, and heal itself if it can do that. And so in this case, this gentleman left hospice cancer-free. Again, total medical heresy, but that's not treating disease. And so this man was still alive at least 24 years later after being given up for dead. And I'm going to confirm with Dr. Reg the next time I speak to him if he's spoken to him recently and if he's still alive. But again, just a phenomenal story that really took me, like as if I needed more convincing. I was already completely excited by this, but it really took me over the edge, if you will, when he started presenting to me these different cancer patients who had that kind of turnaround. And that was just one gentleman. That was not the only one. That was one of many people who had that type of recovery and response to the nutrition. So I'm sure almost every one of you listening to me right now you've either had a patient, a family member, someone close in your circle with Alzheimer's disease. What a truly tragic disease this is. It's now the 6th leading killer of Americans. It is costing us somewhere between $500 billion and $1 trillion per year in both direct and indirect care costs. The approved medications for dementia, if you're lucky, they might delay decline for a while, but they don't really do a whole lot. And the primary caregiver, this is the thing about this disease that we know as well, is most affected by this disease compared to any other type of caregiver. So it's not just the person with the disease, it's actually the primary caregiver that's having the worst health outcomes as well. So this is a truly tragic disease that's not even affecting that many people, actually. We have about 8 million Americans with Alzheimer's, another 6 million or so with different forms of dementia. So out of our total 330 million people in this country today, it's not even that many people relative to diabetes or other diseases, but yet it's such a deadly disease and it's costing us so much financially at the population level. So this was our first paper that Dr. Redwine mentioned that was the stimulus for my getting invited to do the TEDx Miami talk. And this paper was after running this trial and spending 2.5 years. We put people on this formula, this Aloe polysaccharide multinutrient complex, as we called it. We put them on the formula for 4 times per day, put it in a powder form because we know about 30% of people with dementia or Alzheimer's have difficulty swallowing. So we wanted to give them a powder rather than any type of tablet or capsule. We did not change anything else in their daily routine. We certainly did not mess with their meds. We didn't exercise them. We didn't change their diet. We didn't give them any other type of socialization. We just simply added this dietary supplement into their daily routine. We assessed their neurocognitive functioning at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. We drew blood at baseline in 12 months. It's one of those moments now where I should have said, gosh, we should have drawn blood at 3, 6, and 9 as well and put those samples, banked those samples in the freezer. We still have the samples from baseline in 12 months, but our budget was limited. Unfortunately, the donor family didn't give us millions of dollars. They gave us about 160,000, which on the surface may sound like a lot of money, but running clinical trials actually is not a whole lot of money, as I'm sure most of you know. But anyway, we looked at a whole host of immunological and inflammatory factors in the blood. We made sure that they were at least, according to the psychiatrist who worked with us on the study, they had to have been at least moderate to severe severity. So those are the folks that Big Pharma really is not interested in. Big Pharma is studying mild cognitive impairment or maybe a mild form of dementia up to about a year of diagnosis. That's the typical research study that they're doing. In fact, when we were conducting this trial, that was exactly what we were looking for. Dr. McDaniel and I discussed it, and we wanted to have the sickest people because those were the people, again, that Big Pharma typically never studies. They also had to have been diagnosed for at least 1 year. So we were looking at people, again, that at a very severe severity level that had been diagnosed for a while and then were willing to take this dietary supplement in addition to the rest of the rest of whatever they were doing for themselves. This is the only paper. This paper was published in 13. This is the only paper in my career. I like to tell this little anecdote because it's such an interesting one. Dr. Perry is still the journal editor of the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. And shortly after we submitted this paper for publication, we were very excited about it, and you'll see why in just a second. But Dr. Perry called me up and he said, wow, Dr. Lewis, this paper is incredible. I'm going to recommend to our reviewers that we publish this paper as soon as they give me their reviews back because I'm very excited about your results. That's the one and only time in my entire career of publishing that ever happened to me. So I was very flattered by that little compliment that he gave me. So if any of you have worked with the ADAS-COG, that is considered to be the gold standard for assessing cognitive function, particularly in people with dementia. That's not my opinion. That's also found in the scientific literature. The ADAS-COG goes from a score of 70 to 0. So you may, if you're not familiar with the ADAS-COG, you may be looking at this and saying, well, wait a minute, John, the score is going down. Yes, exactly. If you score a 70, you're like this desk that my computer is sitting on. You have no cognitive function. If you score a 0, that is perfect cognitive function. The other interesting thing about the ADAS-COG is it has had a validated clinical score, meaning that if you have a change in your score of 4 points or better, good or bad, then that is considered clinically significant. Folks, at 9 and 12 months, we showed clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease. That is an unheard of finding in the scientific literature. I would encourage anybody, if you know of a similar study in this population showing this kind of an effect, I would love to see it because I've never seen it. Again, if you have a 4 point or greater score change, good or bad, that is deemed clinically significant. Now we know statistically, if you have large numbers in your study, large numbers of subjects, large numbers of assessments, repeated assessments, et cetera, the law of large numbers, just by chance, just by error, you can show statistical significance. But if it doesn't mean anything clinically or practically, especially in this case for people with this tragic disease, you're kind of like, well, who cares? What does it matter? So in this case, the fact that we showed clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function. Oh, by the way, I didn't mention these people on average were 79.9 years of age. And of course, they didn't just have Alzheimer's disease, right? They had diabetes, they had depression, they had different forms of heart disease. These were a relatively advanced group of people from an age perspective, and then also very sick from a health or disease status perspective. So the fact that we showed this, I mean, I'm telling you, when we were analyzing these data, for me, this was and still is the highlight of my scientific career. And this was ultimately why the folks at TEDx Miami chose me to do this talk. Because again, when you look at this from what else you can compare it to, either the 5 FDA approved drugs for dementia, any type of diet, any other dietary supplement, exercise, hyperbaric oxygen, red light therapy, acupuncture, music therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, you name it, there is nothing else like this in the literature. So what explains that clinical practical change? Looking at all of these biomarkers that we looked at in the blood, and of course this is systemic, right? This is not necessarily happening purely in the brain, but we showed this really nice improvement of the CD4 to CD8 ratio. That's our helper cell to our cytotoxic cell ratio. That's very important for all of us, not for just people with Alzheimer's disease. By the way, all of these changes are statistically significant. The changes in TNF alpha and vascular endothelial growth factor, these were probably, our paper is probably the first one showing these reductions in these inflammatory markers in people in this population, this disease population, because as you know, classically, these are looked at in heart disease and cancer. And then finally, in this first paper, we showed just under a 300%, to be exact, a 286% increase in CD14 cells. Again, that is unheard of. And we know from other research, not from our lab, but other research have shown that CD14 cells, which are markers of adult stem cells, can turn into neurons. So our working theory to this study, and again, it's a shame that we didn't extend this, and I'll mention that in just a moment, why I'm no longer full-time in academics. But when you look at this sort of paradigm, if you will, of what went on in our study, you have this amazing clinical practical change combined with the improvement in overall immune system functioning according to the CD4-CD8 ratio, reducing inflammation, and then having this dramatic increase in adult stem cell production. That is the only way that we can make sense of these CD14 cells migrating out to the brain to either create new neurons, create new synapses, create repairs where damage occurred, et cetera. I mean, there's no other rationale that we have that we can make this assumption or this theory without having like imaging data, which we didn't have the money to do. And I don't even know at that time what even the imaging would have been able to show anyway. But nonetheless, again, we're very proud of this work that again, as you can see, why the editor of the journal would have called us so quickly. Now, as we published that first paper, and then we were thinking of, okay, how can we get more money to extend this study? A lot of work was coming out at that time related to brain-derived neurotropic factor, and these are papers going back to 19 or 20 and 17, 18. So again, this has been a few years ago, but there were a lot of papers coming out at that time talking about BDNF being related to memory creation, the functioning of the hippocampus, its role in neuroplasticity. There were a lot of things that were coming out at that time. And so we thought, well, we have all of our samples still in the freezer. Let's look at BDNF and see if it's related to, on the one hand, to cognitive function at any level, and then on the other hand, to some of these immune function and inflammatory markers. So we got 2 more papers out of that. I didn't think these papers were quite as exciting as the first one for the obvious reasons. But one of the things that is interesting is that we showed an increase in BDNF by just over 11% in response to taking this dietary supplement, which again, you'll find very little of that actually in the literature. I think there has been some work recently conducted with lion's mane mushroom, showing that it has a potential effect on BDNF. But for the most part, it's very difficult to find much information related to nutrition or dietary supplementation and its impact on BDNF. Unfortunately, that was not a statistically significant increase. But what we decided to do after that was we had some experience with another study. This was an HIV study where we were looking at HIV and the impact on antiretroviral medications on cognitive function. And what we found in that study was that if we split the subjects by 5,000 picograms of BDNF, there was a definite demarcation between having, if you were over 5,000, your cognitive function was better than if you were below 5,000. And sure enough, that proved to be true in our Alzheimer's study. So if you look at all these different cognitive measures, you can see a very clear delineation where if you have a higher level of BDNF over 5,000, you definitely have much better cognitive function than if you have a BDNF level below 5,000. And then in the other paper, unfortunately, I think this information speaks to the rapid nature of change of our immune system's functioning, and then, of course, inflammation as well, depending on when you draw someone's blood and the impact that it could have in terms of the biomarkers you're interested in. So a lot of this didn't really make too much consistent sense related to the first paper. I mean, you can look at some of these things related to VEGF or EGF or some of the different immune cells, and then it's really kind of difficult. I mean, we go into that quite a bit of explanation in the discussion section in this paper. But again, it was at least something worthwhile to publish to look at some of these different links between BDNF and immune function and inflammation. So that was the third paper that we published from our Alzheimer's study. And then finally, the most recent paper that we published from this study is a very fascinating and, again, first-time study, first-time data that's been published in the scientific literature to our knowledge, where when I was looking at something referred to as the inflammation index in a couple of papers in a review paper that we wrote, I came across the Th1 to Th2 hypothesis related to inflammation. And I thought, well, that's very fascinating. We have all of these cytokines and growth factors. So I can easily make these calculations, and then I can see if this changes over the 12-month intervention period. So I went to PubMed, and I'm trying to find any other paper that categorizes the Th1 to Th2 ratio, your pro-inflammatory to your anti-inflammatory side of your immune system, generally speaking. I could not find one other paper on PubMed where this had ever been published or characterized in people with Alzheimer's disease. So I'm sure for all of you as well, that's kind of a good or a bad thing. Like, it's good in the sense that you may be the first people to publish that information, but it's bad in the sense that you're kind of just like, shooting into the dark a little bit. But nonetheless, we made the calculations. We calculated 6 ratios looking at the Th1 to Th2 ratio. And then we had another study of healthy people where we had the exact same 12 cytokines and growth factors. So they were a nice comparison group at the baseline assessment. And it turned out to be just a very fascinating study. So again, this was published a couple of years ago in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. So look at these 6 ratios. Here are the 6 ratios on the left of the screen. Then you have the Alzheimer's patients in the next column, the healthy adults in the next column, and then your p-value on the end on the right. Look at the Alzheimer's patients, totally Th1 dominant, very, very extreme values showing this pro-inflammatory profile of all of those folks. Then look at the healthy adults. Most of them are somewhere around 1.0. So you have not exactly total balance, but at least, certainly pretty well balanced in terms of all those different ratios. So that was the comparison at baseline. And then, of course, all those were statistically significantly different. Then look at what happened in the Alzheimer's patients going from baseline to 12 months. Even though only 2 of them were statistically significant, 5 of the 6 ratios become what I refer to as less Th1 dominant. Certainly they're not anywhere near unity, but at least they're moving in that direction. And they all are, 5 of the 6 of them are going in that direction. And then finally, the clinical cherry on top of the cake, or the icing on top of the cake, if you will, is that when you look at this rebalancing effect, this less Th1 dominance, you get improvements in cognitive function. So I thought that was a really nice again, clinical practical finding to say that, well, it's nice to show these immunological changes, but if nothing really translates to the practical side, again, it's kind of like, so what, or who cares? But again, we showed really nice improvement in cognitive function as you get a a better balanced immune profile according to that Th1 to Th2 ratio. One of my working theories is that, and unfortunately we didn't collect infection data in the Alzheimer's study, is that these folks had a lot of infections, and so they were being activated, reactivated, and that's the reason why they were so Th1 dominant, among other reasons, certainly the neurodegeneration as well. But again, that was a really nice finding from that study. I won't review these findings again, but again, if you look at the entire perspective of all of those four papers, there is nothing else like what we've shown in the scientific literature when you combine all of that together. And again, we're all just very proud. Everyone that's worked on this, very proud of that work. The MS study, and I know I'm looking at the clock here, so I'm going to run out of time here a lot quicker than I had hoped. But in the MS study, we looked at people with relapsing remitting disease. Now we know that MS, obviously being some sort of a hybrid disease of both neurodegeneration and autoimmunity, so you would expect probably some similarities to the Alzheimer's study, which we did show, but also some differences, which we also showed. And we collected very similar biomarkers in the blood. We had basically the exact same type of research design. We had a 12-month intervention, putting them on this dietary supplement formulation. Of course, the quality of life measures were different because, again, you don't expect as much cognitive dysfunction in MS as you do with Alzheimer's. So that was different. But I'm going to present first the first two papers that we published from this clinical trial. One of the things that I learned is that the leading cause of mortality in people with MS is not demyelination of the central nervous system. It's actually infection. And infection with people with MS, I'm sure plenty of you know, it's very difficult to treat. It's very costly. You have people going in and out of urgent care, in and out of the hospital. So it's not only killing people, but it's also very expensive. Look at what we showed in this clinical trial. Over that 12-month period, they went from just under 8 infections at baseline to about 2.5. Again, a remarkable finding, not only being able to keep people alive, but keeping them out of this overburdened, financially distraught medical management that is just such a burden on people. So that was just, for us, a huge finding that we didn't even, well, I shouldn't say we didn't expect it. If you go back to the bi-review paper that I showed you guys initially when I started talking about acemannan, one of the leading results of studying of aloe vera is that it is very anti-infectious. So it's not a total surprise that we found this, but certainly to the degree that we found it was very important. Now, again, it's certainly interesting when you think of this. And one of the things that is most fascinating, I think one of the most fascinating discoveries we made in this clinical trial is epidermal growth factor. So you can see a really nice increase in epidermal growth factor over the 12-month period. One of the things that EGF does is it is a protein that is very important for remyelination of central nervous system tissue. So that will make sense when I show you some of these quality of life findings in just a moment. And then the CD95, CD34 cells, those encode on the gene, on the FAS, your overall indication of how well your immune system is functioning. So whereas we looked at the CD4, CD8 ratio in the Alzheimer's study, from a cellular perspective, from a genetic perspective, we also showed a very nice increase in the overall functioning of the immune system. And all of these changes and findings were statistically significant. Now, excuse me, whereas the ADAS-Cog is the gold standard for assessing cognitive function, particularly in people with dementia, the FAMS, the Functional Assessment of Multiple Sclerosis, is the gold standard for assessing functional capacity in people with MS. So look at all of these scales here from this. And you can see a little bit of I guess you could call it a plateauing effect from 9 and 12 months. That could have been due to, fatigue of the subjects collecting data. I'm not sure exactly what that's entirely due to, but nonetheless, the overall effect for almost all of these scales is statistically significant. Clinically, I'm not sure, there's not so much agreement about the clinical significance of these different scores, but statistically, you're showing improvements across the board. The only thing that was not statistically significant was the family social well-being, and then the emotional well-being was sort of more of a statistical trend rather than statistically significant. But nonetheless, across the board, that was highly, highly statistically relevant. And then you have the EQ5D3L. Say that fast 6 times in a row. I cannot. But that's a global indicator of quality of life. That was also highly statistically significant over the 12-month period. The BDI, the Beck Depression Inventory, that's not a diagnosis of depression, but it's used to look at depressive symptomatology, highly statistically significant over the course of the 12 months. And then the HCDS, that was kind of a homemade scale that the clinic used in evaluating all the different symptoms mostly from an organ perspective. And again, that was highly statistically significant over the 12-month period. So when you think about all of these quality of life changes, how much the person's quality of life improved, it makes sense that you had this improvement in the EGF, where you're potentially getting this remyelination of the central nervous system to actually allow these people to be functional again, to feel better, to not be in pain, to not be able to, need a total assistance all the time. So those were really nice collaborative findings that really supported each other. And then finally, our third paper from this study is essentially a sister paper to the last paper in the Alzheimer study, again, looking at this Th1 to Th2 phenomenon in this group. And we use the same comparative group of the healthy folks to make that comparison. This has actually been looked at a bit previously in MS, although not from the perspective of giving somebody a dietary supplement or giving a sample of subjects dietary supplements and then seeing the changes over time. But nonetheless, it has been looked at a little bit, in addition to being looked at in HIV, rheumatoid arthritis, some other immune and infectious issues. I didn't mention this before, but this model goes all the way back to a 1986 paper where some investigators were looking at how to explain HIV at that time, and they came up with this Th1 to Th2 theory. So very quickly, because I know we're getting short on time. So here are the same exact 6 ratios of the Th2 to Th1, the Th1 to Th2 perspective. And then you can see how different only the first 2, if you can recall back to the numbers from the Alzheimer's patients, only the first 2 of the MS patients were really significantly Th1 dominant. But look at the differences between the healthy people and then the MS patients in the other 4 ratios. They're almost exactly alike. I mean, it's very fascinating when you actually consider this difference. And then look at what happens over the period of that 12 months. We actually get increasing Th1 dominance. In fact, we now have 5 of the 6 of them becoming more Th1 dominant. Now think about what happened in that infection slide that I showed you guys. So you have all of this infection going on at baseline, and then you give them the dietary supplements, these polysaccharides that are so anti-infectious. You knock all of these infections down, but at the same time, what is it saying at the immune system's level? It's showing that you increase the pro-inflammation. It makes perfect sense because it's showing that you're actually elevating the inflammation. You're turning on the signaling mechanisms to counteract all those infections. So for us, this made perfect sense that these data came out this way. And then as they became Th1 more Th1 dominant, they actually had improvements in some of these various quality of life measures. So again, it was like perfect sense. I mean, you have to kind of, piece the puzzle together from different data sets, but it's a very comprehensive approach and a comprehensive look at what's going on in response to taking these particular nutrients in all these different biomarkers and quality of life markers. So I won't go over these findings again because again, we're very short on time, but ultimately, and it looks like I guess I need to stop here at the Aloe side. I'm sorry I didn't even get to the rice bran side, but maybe that would be part 2 of my lecture if you guys would like to have me back. But it's very obvious to us that these polysaccharides are capable of immunomodulation. What does that mean? Immunomodulation, it sounds like a sophisticated term. Well, it simply means that it's almost like an adaptogenic effect. It's certainly not immunostimulation. It's definitely not immune suppression. It's really finding that balance, if you will, of where the immune system needs to be sending factors to repair damage or to heal something or to correct something. And so that's what we mean when we talk about immunomodulation, is really finding that sweet spot in the balance between pro and anti-inflammation, the Th1 to Th2, some of these other biomarkers that we looked at, and then all these other effects that we've shown. I mean, again, these are first time findings that I'm very, very proud of. And I don't mean to sound like a narcissist or an egomaniac about what we've done here, but again, if you compare these 7 papers and these two from these 2 clinical trials to basically anything else out there, and what we are ultimately showing to be able to help people improve their quality of life, for me, that's where the rubber really hits the road. I mean, I had so many incredible responses, especially in the entire study, of caregivers calling me up in tears. In some cases, he or she had not happened in years. I mean, for me, that's really where it's so exciting. And in fact, I'll tell you just very quickly before I conclude, the oldest lady we had in the Alzheimer's study, she was 93. She had been diagnosed with the disease for 12 years, way beyond what usually people will live with this terrible disease. She was in a wheelchair and she was not speaking. She would come to the center basically for a little bit of socialization. And so when we decided to absolutely enroll her in the study because we wanted to give her the possibility of having something, she started taking the supplement. And then one day before the 3 month intervention, she came in, she walked into the center and she called one of the clinical coordinators, Raphael, by his first name. I'm getting chill bumps because I get chill bumps every time I tell this. He started crying like a baby. He could not believe this lady was out of her wheelchair and actually remembered his name for the first time. So that was the kind of experience that I've had, and I continue having as I work with these nutrients and I try to help people. That's my mission in life, is spreading this word about what I'm doing and this research, and just simply wanting to help people. I mean, that really is my mission in life. So I know we're almost out of time. I guess again I will keep the rice bran for a part 2 if you guys would have me back, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. This was a wonderful presentation, and I've heard from a couple of people they would love a part 2 of this, of your research be presented, and as would I. And so I have one question from somebody. Are these polysaccharides available to the general public?
Absolutely. I don't want to violate the CME. So if that
But
person
they
would
can
like to
find
contact,
online
yes.
uh, places. Okay, wonderful. And then what other kinds of areas do you think um, you would start looking at for using these polysaccharides, like other like autoimmune, or are there other um,
So,
directions?
so I can tell you again, if I had the money, I mean, if I had Bill Gates or Warren Buffett's money, we would be running a whole host of clinical trials right now. In fact, if I may, I'll just tell you really quickly, the reason I'm not still in academics full time is because I went from publishing that first study in 2013, and then I thought, oh my goodness, NIH and Alzheimer's Association and all these people are going to write me blank checks to extend this money. I tried 2 times with NIH, 2 times with Alzheimer's Association prior to me resigning full time, and I got that much in response.
Mm.
So I went from, on top of the mountain, cloud 9, to I didn't even go into the valley. I went below it. I was so frustrated and disappointed and upset with the lack of response and the lack of just acknowledgement of what we have on our hands. And so that was the reason, quite frankly, I would still be in at UM full time doing this research. But to answer your question, I'm sorry for that little tangent. I have had I've been grateful to experience people with all sorts of health challenges respond to these polysaccharides, because again, if you reflect back to that one slide that I showed you guys, where those polysaccharides are so crucial when the endoplasmic reticulum talks to the Golgi. And so fundamentally, they're used by every cell in the body. So I've worked with people with not just neurodegeneration, but cancer, heart disease, diabetes, all different types of health challenges. And again, please no one quote me to say that I'm saying we're using nutrition to treat disease. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying that these polysaccharides, there's just something very special about what they do to our cells and how they cause our cells to function the way they're supposed to. And so for me, it's just a very rewarding experience. And I don't want to make it sound like, well, every single person, has a response. That's not true either, because that's putting too much of a burden just on the polysaccharides. There, as you know, there are so many other things that each person has to address, from a health history standard, from exposure to all sorts of stuff in the world today, other nutritional deficiencies. So it's not like just one size fits all. I mean, I try to work with people as much as I can to individualize the protocol, but I've just seen so many amazing things happen when people take them. I mean, I've been on this formula for over a decade. I've had my mother on it for 13 years. My wife started taking it when our first child was born. I've had both of our children taking them since they were 5 and 6 months of age. So we know prevention is just as important as treatment. And I look at these as a toolbox that you put in your toolbox, a tool that you put in your toolbox
Hmm.
that is just as important as anything else you do. That's how I think of them.
So that's yes, we are really looking forward to what else you can do with these polysaccharides. It makes sense that as long as what it's functioning at a biological cellular level, that it would be useful for lots of diseases that stem from that. And somebody has a question. What form do you normally prescribe, or not you personally prescribe, but what form do people usually take it in? In pill form, powder form? You mentioned powder, or for the Alzheimer's because they don't take pills as well.
Yes, we,
Oh, you're
right.
breaking.
We have it in a powder, and we have it in a powder, and we also have it in a capsule for people that don't like the taste or the texture. So we have it in both.
Nice. Okay, very good to know. Um, so, there any other questions that we have here?
Oh, I see here somebody asked, has RFK responded to your work? I mean, I've tried through multiple different ways to get in touch with him. I actually went when he was still running for president. I actually went to one of his fundraisers here in town, and I shook his hand and, talked to the man for a minute, but that was no opportunity to go into discussion or any in-depth detail about what these polysaccharides could do. I've had other people tell me, "Oh yeah, I know so and so who works with that group, blah blah blah," and it, of course, didn't go anywhere. But I mean, I would love what I just told all of you. I would love to have the opportunity to tell him. I don't have any delusion that's going to happen, but this for me is so simple. It's so basic. It's not expensive, and it could do so much for our entire population if people were aware of these polysaccharides and how beneficial they are to health, because we all know we're drowning in chronic disease. I mean, how many more years can we continue drowning in chronic disease? And these polysaccharides are such a tool to help address all of that.
Wonderful. So I've really enjoyed your presentation, and it looks like everybody else has enjoyed it as well. And many people would love to have a part two. Oh, somebody said to share with Maria Shriver, might be a good person as well.
Sure. I know
So,
she's involved in Alzheimer's research. I just don't have any connection to her.
right. Yeah. So I guess pursuing that, I'm not sure how you would do it either, but maybe somebody can email and who has suggestions, who hears your message. That would be great.
Yes. I'm an open book. I'm happy to share this story with anyone who will listen to me.
Well, thank you very much for giving us your time, very valuable time, and sharing your information and expertise with us. And we're looking forward to hearing part two.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's been a treat. and a pleasure. This was only the second time I've been asked to do a grand rounds at UM. The first one was over 20 years ago, so it's been a long time coming.
Well, we'll have another one soon. So
Beautiful.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty.